The time is at hand.
From the land between the crackheads in Williamson, West Virginia, you are in dark places. My name is Junebug Fugit, and I really sound like this. Been noticing a lot of podcasters using AI-generated voices for their content. I'm not here to pass judgment. If that's what they want to do, then all the power to them. I tend to like human voices better, though. Using an AI voice would save me a lot of time. I spend anywhere from 20 to 50 hours a week editing these shows and putting them together. For some weird reason, I get kind of tongue-tied in my old age. I don't know what that's about. But, as I've said before, AI is demonic. I don't want no part of it.
This is Mr. Haunted for your In Dark Places breaking news. I'm not calling this breaking news like it just happened. I'm calling it literally breaking news. A 10-year-old Indiana boy was crushed to death. Dead. After his foster mother, who weighed 340 pounds, allegedly sat on him for several minutes because he was acting bad. Quotation marks. Jennifer Lee Wilson, 48, was sentenced in January to 6 years in prison with 1 year suspended to be served on probation, according to WMAQ. She was charged with reckless homicide in the death of little Dakota Levi Stevens. On April 25th, last year, police were called to a home in Valparaiso, Indiana, because the boy was not breathing and turned out to have no pulse, CBS News reported. An officer found bruising on the child's lower neck and chest. Officers attempted to resuscitate the boy, but he was transported to a hospital where he later died. Wilson told police that the boy had just run away from home and she had found him at a neighbor's house and brought him back home. She said he was still acting bad and threw himself on the ground, telling her that he was leaving. According to a court filing, Wilson told police when she attempted to stop him from leaving, she does not know if she tackled Dakota or they fell to the ground. However, her intention was to hold him. She said she sat on his midsection for about 5 minutes. He eventually stopped moving, but she thought he was faking. "Are you faking?" she asked before she rolled him over and noticed his eyelids were pale. Wilson then began performing CPR and called 911. I wonder if when the lady's performing CPR, it looks like she's like making muffins or something. Or like rolling dough. I don't know. On April 27th, South Bend Memorial Hospital reported that Dakota had died. He suffered organ and soft tissue damage, liver and lung hemorrhaging, and other injuries. An autopsy revealed the cause of death as mechanical asphyxia and the manner of death, a homicide. The neighbor told officers that Dakota ran to her house before the medical emergency and asked her to adopt him because his parents hit him in the face. The neighbor said she did not observe any signs of injury to the boy. Wilson then came back to take her son, the neighbor said. Dakota was about 4'10" and 90 pounds, while Wilson was listed at 4'11", 340 pounds. Holy mackerels. And that does it for breaking news. Back to Junebug on In Dark Places.
There's Jimmy Haunted. Thank you, sir. This week on the show, the Aliens of Ummo. Are there extraterrestrial beings living among us on Earth? Events surrounding two spectacular Spanish UFO sightings suggest that this extraordinary possibility may be fact. Hillary Evans investigates the claims. Thanks, Hillary. Most ufologists believe that the Ummo affair was a hoax, but they also acknowledge that it was so elaborately conceived and so carefully executed that it is utterly unlike all the other UFO hoaxes. It is a mystery with plenty of clues along the trail, some real, some obviously false, and many that lie tantalizingly between the two. Whatever the truth, this is, in every way, a refreshing change from the more usual alleged encounters with people from other worlds. As the Ummites themselves explained, "We have not come to bring you a new doctrine, as prophets descending from the skies to teach a new physics or mathematics, or preach a new religion, or offering you panaceas for your social or pathopsychological ills." Apparently in 1950, inhabitants of the planet Ummo, 14 light years away, landed on Earth. They lived among us for 15 years undetected, establishing their bases and acclimatizing themselves to our way of life. Then in 1965, they started to make contact. Initially, they compiled a list of 20 carefully selected individuals, most of whom were Spanish. They included a playwright, a police officer, an employee in the American Embassy in Madrid, an engineer, an official of the telegraph office, a lawyer, and two of Spain's best-known ufologists, Antonio Ribera and Rafael Farios. Many of those on the list were also members of a small Spanish group, the Society of Friends of Space, including their founder/president, Fernando Sesma. According to the Ummites, those on this particular list constitute the Madrid group. There are other groups all over the world. Early in 1965, the Ummites began to contact the names on their Madrid list by letter or telephone to explain the purpose of their mission to Earth. One of the few who has openly described what happened is the engineer Enrique Villagrasa Novoa, who received his telephone call late at night on November 28, 1966. The speaker identified himself as an extraterrestrial being and spoke fluently and intelligently, though in a voice that was both faintly foreign and mechanical, for about 2 hours. He described engineering and obviously had an impressively detailed knowledge of the subject. He followed this up by posting on some documents a few days later. Unfortunately, few of those on the Ummites list have revealed the details of how they were contacted. It seems the letters were usually typewritten on paper that bore a distinctive mark, nor do we know how many others the Ummites telephoned, nor whether they contacted anyone more than once. All we know is that some of those who had a specialist interest received follow-up documents. One of the problems that besets the story is that there has been very little investigation into vital points. For example, no one seems to have made any detailed, systematic attempt to look into the ways in which the Ummites contacted the people on their list. In 1969, the Ummites contacted a prominent UFO researcher, Antonio Ribera, who had in fact heard about them 2 years earlier, when he had been introduced to Villagrasa. Rather curiously, he kept the matter quiet, and it was only in 1975, 8 years after first hearing about it, and 6 years after being contacted by the Ummites, that he spoke out. The Ummites suggested to Ribera that their planet may orbit the star we know as Wolf 424. Apparently, it is difficult for them to be more precise than this because our astronomical references are incompatible with theirs. They claimed that in 1948 they had accidentally picked up a strange radio signal with a frequency of 413.44 megacycles, which they were unable to decipher. Eventually they traced it to a planet known to them as Uyaga, or Cold Star of Quadrate. They refer to our sun as Quadrate. The signal was later identified as having been transmitted by a Norwegian scientific research vessel. The transmission took place between February 5th and 7th, 1934, and it took 14 years to travel to Ummo. Subsequent investigation confirmed the presence of such a ship, transmitting on this frequency between these dates. The Umites were surprised at this evidence of intelligent life on our planet and decided to investigate. 2 years later, in March of 1950, a lenticular-shaped spaceship landed secretly near the small town of La Havie in Les Bosses, Alpes, France, in a wild and sparsely populated region, well suited to their purposes. Landing went unobserved, and a party of 6, 4 males and 2 females, was left on Earth. They took over a nearby country house, paying its owners to leave, and excavated an underground hiding place as their base. When the story eventually became public knowledge, it is said that the French authorities carried out an official investigation of the alleged landing area. Some reports claim that they found evidence of unusual activity, but the French ufologist René Fouillard described their findings as uncertain and contradictory. During their early years on Earth, the Umites had some difficulty in adjusting to conditions here. Though broadly similar to us sociologically, there were certain differences, one of the most marked being that their fingers were so sensitive to light and other forms of radiation that they initially found it very awkward to use. For example, lift buttons and electric light switches. Unfortunately, our information about the Umites is restricted to what they have chosen to tell us, so that our knowledge of their affairs is very patchy. Consequently, all we know about the Umites' first 15 years on Earth is that they acquired a great deal of information about us and established a secure base for themselves. They certainly were not in any hurry to make themselves known, and when they did so, it was not to any government, but to selected individuals. Even then, they did not go out of their way to provide incontrovertible proof as to their supposed identity. They explained the reason for their apparent lack of zeal. Some of you keep saying that we must give you proof. We continue to repeat, until you are tired of hearing it, that we are not concerned whether or not you believe us. We can operate much more effectively in anonymity, and we are not going to be so naive as to introduce ourselves to you openly, simply to satisfy your need for proof. Their communications were limited to information about themselves and their planet, their way of life, and their culture. All very informative, but nothing that could be verified. But then, in the spring of 1967, the Umites told 3 of their contacts that on June 1st, a Umite spacecraft would land just outside Madrid, pick up some of them, and take them back to Ummo. They indicated the approximate landing site. This bizarre announcement appeared in the Spanish newspaper Informaciones on May 20th, 1967, and several members of the Madrid group went armed with cameras to try to photograph the spacecraft. And on June 1st, at 8:20 p.m., as predicted, a Umite spacecraft was seen by scores of witnesses. But the evidence that should have proved that the Umites were who they claimed to be simply confused many people when it became known that there had been a sighting 16 months earlier in the same area, similar in many ways to the June 1st sighting. Why, they argued, had not the Umites announced this sighting beforehand too? The earlier sighting occurred on February 6, 1966, in the suburb of Aluche, to the southwest of Madrid. Between 8 and 9 p.m., an orange-colored, disc-shaped UFO had made a brief landing on a farm near an airfield. It was seen by a large number of witnesses, including a group of soldiers, a man named Vicente Fortuno, who, from his 6th floor apartment, saw it both land and take off, and a housewife who declared she saw a giant eye looking at her. The most important witness, though, was a motorist named Jose Luis Jordan, who saw the object from his car. He stopped to get out and take a better look, and then drove on to where he thought it had landed. As he approached, it rose quickly, but he was able to give a detailed account of what he saw. The craft was luminous, colored, and 33 to 39 feet in diameter, giving out a steady, muted, vibratory sound. Beneath it were 3 projections resembling landing gear, and a curious marking, something like the letter H. Marks were later found in the area where Jordan had seen the landing, and a photograph from them appeared in Informaciones. The predicted UFO was seen in near daylight conditions, a little after sunset, in 3 separate locations. In the southwest suburbs of Madrid, the first sightings were over the open grounds of what had once been an aristocratic mansion, now the convent school San Jose de Valderas. Several people, including families and couples, were enjoying the evening air when a small disc-shaped object appeared over the school. Dozens of witnesses were said to have watched it maneuver for about 12 minutes, so close to the ground that it almost touched the trees. It looked like 2 basins joined rim to rim. There was nothing resembling landing gear beneath it, but there were markings very like those seen by Senor Jordan. Interestingly, the markings on this second UFO, though not exactly similar to those on the Aluche UFO, were identical to the distinctive marks on the letters the Umites posted when they contacted those on their list in 1965. After whirling about the sky for several minutes with no obvious purpose, the UFO sped away. Shortly afterward, it was seen by other witnesses in the nearby suburb of Santa Monica, and a restaurant owner reported that several people rushed in telling him what they had seen. 2 young couples claimed they had actually seen it land, though it was later said that there were marks on the ground where the object landed. No one seems to have taken any photographs of it coming down, although it was photographed in the sky. The following morning, Antonio San Antonio, unfortunate name, who worked in the picture department of Informaciones, received a telephone call from a young man who would not give his name, but who said that the previous evening he had been at San Jose de Valderas, where the UFO was sighted, and that he had managed to take 5 photographs of the craft, which the newspaper was free to publish. Shortly afterward, a Spanish ufologist named Maurice Yeget published a book in which he requested additional information on the San Jose sighting. On August 26, he received a letter from a man signing himself Antonio Pardo, who described how he and his family had been in the area on June 1st and had seen not only the UFO, but a young man taking photographs of it. Antonio Pardo also had his camera with him, and he too took photographs of the UFO. Alas, in his excitement, he forgot to take off the lens cap when he took the first 2 pictures. Nonetheless, he did end up with 7 clear pictures, 2 of which he sent to Yeget. They were very similar to those taken by the anonymous young man. Pardo not only provided these valuable photos, but he also offered vital physical evidence. It had been reported that some strange tubes had been seen on the ground where the UFO landed. Several inhabitants of the neighborhood received letters from one Henry Dagasset offering to purchase those tubes for a scientific research group at just over 100 pounds each. The letters included a drawing showing that Dagasset knew exactly what he was asking for. Fortunately, Pardo had heard of a boy who had found one of the tubes and who had opened it with a pair of pliers. A liquid had escaped and evaporated. Inside were 2 strips of green plastic bearing the same distinctive mark as the UFO and the Umite letters. Pardo sent these to Yeget, who, in turn, passed them on to 2 UFO colleagues, Ribeiro and Farios. It is not clear whether Yeget knew the significance of the mark, but Ribeiro must have appreciated the importance of the find. Farios had an uncle who was president of INTA, the Spanish National Technical Institute for Aeronautics and Space Research. He had the tube and its contents analyzed. It turned out that the tube was made of high-purity nickel, while the plastic was polyvinyl fluoride, a substance not available commercially, but that was manufactured in the United States by DuPont Nemours for NASA. Hardly the certain proof of extraterrestrial technology for which believers in the Ummo story were looking. Nonetheless, the sum of all the evidence, the abundance of witnesses, the two independent sets of photographs, the physical traces of landings of UFO, and the curious artifact made the case unique, notwithstanding the Ummo connection, which was not at the time public knowledge. Recognizing its importance, Ribera and Figueroa embarked on an investigation that ultimately resulted in a book to which their publisher gave the title Un Caso Perfecto, a perfect case. Their French publisher entitled it Preuves de l'existence des coupes volantes, proof of the existence of flying saucers. On the surface, these claims may seem justifiable, but there are still too many unanswered questions. A large number of the witnesses were either anonymous or untraceable. Much of the evidence was ambiguous or contradictory. Why, for example, were the Luce landing marks still well defined 2 rainy days after the landing? Why, 2 years after the event, was Jose Luis Jordan, the only witness to have seen the strange markings on the earlier UFO, busy checking on witnesses to the later sighting? And why, in their book, did Ribeiro and Figueroa keep quiet about the most bizarre aspect of the case, the Ummo connection? The Ummo affair is riddled with doubtful aspects. While the supporters argue that it involves more contact with extraterrestrials than any other case before, it appears that the most contact anyone actually had was just a single telephone call. However, there may have been one exception. Between 1967 and 1971, the members of the Madrid group received a letter from a man who claimed to be the Umite's typist. Apparently he had advertised for work in a newspaper and had subsequently been visited by 2 tall, fair-haired, respectably dressed men. They told him that they were Danish doctors and asked if he would type out scientific material for them on a regular basis. Initially all went well until the day he read the following sentence. We come from a celestial body named Ummo, which is 14.6 light years from Earth. He took this at its face value and questioned the doctors. Eventually, they admitted that they were not Danish doctors at all, but extraterrestrial visitors. To prove their identity, they produced a tiny spear, just an inch or so in diameter, which one of them placed in midair before the typist. He looked into it, and to his amazement saw a scene that had taken place in the same office on the preceding day, when his wife, fearing the Danish doctors might be spies, had advised him to go to the police. They apologized for invading his privacy, but said it was necessary for their own security. The unnamed typist then wrote to the members of the Madrid group, suggesting a meeting with them to discuss the matter, but this meeting did not actually take place. Allegedly, the Umites prevented it. Unfortunately, not only is this all that we know of the alleged meeting between a human and a Umite, but the whole story is riddled with absurdities. What was there about the typescripts that made the typist's wife think the doctors might be spies? And why do we not know the typist's name? Yet if the story is untrue, how do we account for the fact that he had a list of the Umite's correspondence? This suggests that he was responsible for typing and distributing the Umite letters. The majority of these letters were posted in Madrid, but not all of them. The first letter, sent to the ufologist Antonio Ribera, for example, was postmarked the Gare Saint-Lazare in Paris. The other letters are known to have been sent from London, Germany, New Zealand, Austria, Canada, and Yugoslavia. Most of the letters were written in Spanish, and the rest were in French, although it looks as though they were written by a Spaniard. Occasionally the Spanish spelling of a word is used instead of the French. Also, some of the French language letters are devoid of grave accents, which suggests that they may have been typed on a Spanish machine because Spanish does not have this accent. The telephone conversations, too, were conducted in Spanish. And since the discussion often referred to rather technical matters, for example, the U-mites discussed engineering with Enrique Villarosa Novoa, it would have been very difficult for anyone other than a fluent speaker of Spanish to use the correct terminology. Only a small proportion of the U-mites' letters have been made publicly available, and these are formal monographs dealing with specific subjects. Of those that have been published, the two most detailed describe life on Ummo and the space vehicles that carried the U-mites to Earth. Predictably, we are told that life on Ummo is, in many respects, superior to life on Earth. However, the differences are not so very great. As with so many other alien worlds that we are said to have come into contact with, the U-mites do not seem to have discovered photography, nor understood how much we rely on photographic evidence. Consequently, they have given us much verbal description, but no proof. One photograph of a U-mite standing in front of his home would be so much more convincing, but sadly there is no such photograph. Apparently the U-mites are very similar to human beings in shape and appearance, which certainly explains how they are able to survive on Earth with the minimum of adaptation. Some of them even mingling with us, described as Danish doctors. There are some minor sociological differences, such as their extremely sensitive fingers, which explains why they had to find someone else to do the typing for them, despite the threat of their security. The most significant physical difference between ourselves and the U-mites is that during their puberty, both sexes' vocal cords are so severely affected that speech becomes impossible. Adults therefore communicate by telepathy. The group sent to Earth was selected from the few exceptional individuals who remain immune to this impediment. Other minor differences include the U-mite sense of smell, which is so highly developed that they have made an art form out of blending perfumes together so cleverly that we, unfortunately, cannot appreciate these delightful subtle effects. The U-mites' religious attitudes are informed by a belief in the soul and in a creator, God. The body and the soul are linked by a chain of 84 krypton atoms in the hypothalamus, part of the brain, that regulates the body's temperature. When an eminent French psychologist heard about this, he declared that he would investigate the matter, but encountered the problem of not having a U-mite to study. At the age of 13.7, U-mite children leave their family for teaching centers, where they are prepared for adult life. There are no taboos about public nudity on Ummo. If someone is suspected of being ashamed of being seen naked, any of his superiors can order him to strip to get him used to the idea. One imagines that such a practice would tend to induce self-consciousness rather than eliminate it, but this approach is apparently successful. Those who have seen the U-mite scripts have noted that they are relatively free from preaching and the patronizing tone that other allegedly extraterrestrial messages usually contain. The U-mites do not encourage us to abandon nuclear power, to become vegetarians, or to love one another more. Reading between the lines, one senses a thread of disapproval of some of our behavior, but they certainly do not want us to give up our lifestyle for theirs. Although the U-mites' technology does not enable them to take photographs, in all other ways it is more sophisticated than ours. Their astronomical equipment picked up the messages transmitted by the Norwegian scientific research vessel at a distance of 14.6 light years, and their ability to launch a space expedition in 2 years puts NASA's best efforts to shame. One item of U-mite technology was lent temporarily to one of their contacts, a professor in the Faculty of Medicine at Madrid University. He was sent a small package that contained a smooth, black, metallic-like cube. One side had a translucent screen. The accompanying instructions told him to utter certain vowels in a specific sequence. Somewhat apprehensively, he did as instructed, taking the precaution of filming the operation. When he uttered the vowels, the little screen became illuminated, and inside, the doctor saw a live specimen of a nerve cell. He uttered more sounds, and other specimens appeared. Unfortunately, he was not allowed to keep the device, which was collected by the Umite's emissary, none other than the mysterious typist. The doctor did, however, keep the film. Since the name of the doctor has been withheld, we do not know what happened to it, or indeed whether there is a scrap of truth in the entire story. The Umites also claim that our understanding of physics is woefully simple. Although our physicists are starting to research into the fourth dimension, this is child's play to the Umites, who make practical use of at least 10 dimensions, and are aware of many more. They also believe that the subatomic particles that our physicists are continually discovering are illusions. Apparently these phenomena result from the different positions of the 3 axes that comprise what the Umites call Mbuzu U, their model of the fundamental physical particle. The Ummo scripts contain a wealth of such stimulating ideas. It certainly sounds impressive enough, but nothing has been substantiated. Take, for example, their ingenious account of how they are able to take advantage of certain aspects of space, which we know nothing of, using folds and wraps in the continuum to reduce enormous distances to manageable journeys. According to the ufologist Antonio Rivera, he has seen blueprints of a number of useful devices provided by members of the Madrid group. They include a new type of altimeter, a sound recorder with no moving parts, and most impressively of all, computers based on titanium crystals that store information at the atomic level. These devices have enabled the Umites, while on Earth, to collect and store information on most aspects of our civilization. Apparently this has been dispatched to Ummo. In 1976, a young French psychiatrist, unnamed as usual, but reputed to be of Nobel Prize stature, declared that the data provided in the 43-page typescript in which the Umites described their spacecraft would enable him to replicate it. He started work on the construction of what the Umites call a Euelia Ewo Om, which we know as the flying saucer. A small experimental prototype was successfully constructed and is said to have worked. Unfortunately, no further communication has been issued. Unsatisfactory as all this undoubtedly is, there is no doubt that the Umite transcripts are far superior to those issued by other alleged extraterrestrials. In addition, the tone of voice behind the messages is much more intelligent than that of other extraterrestrial communications, and, as already mentioned, far less patronizing. Antonio Rivera has said that we have watched the emergence of a structural language with its own characteristic manner of forming adverbs and derivatives with its verbs as also grammar, and so on. In fact, as anyone in any way acquainted with private languages must be aware, the language of Ummo is pathetically crude and inflexible. It does not begin to compare, for example, with the imaginary Martian language created by Flournoy's patient, Aileen Smith, when she was in a trance state. Yet the vocabulary of the Umites is unconvincing. Their sentence construction is totally ludicrous. Take, for example, this sentence: do Ummo, do Ummo, Ummo, do, which is supposed to mean we have come from Ummo and we arrived with our vessel in the south of France. Clearly it cannot be translated word for word, so presumably its meaning is contained in the combination of sounds, just as the different arrangements of dots and dashes in the Morse code, or the binary code of a computer, encapsulate significant information. But even then, it is not easy to believe that the sentence quoted above can mean what it does when do Ummo, Ummo, do Ummo means we are from Ummo and we need food urgently. Ummo speak must be one of the least satisfactory aspects of this confusing business. But if language of their scripts invalidates the communications themselves and so those responsible for them, how much truth is there, if any, in the Ummo affair? One of the most alarming aspects of life on Earth with which the Umites had to contend, according to them, was the danger of being caught in a nuclear war. But being the logical creatures that they are, they devised a way of measuring the potential danger of any conflict, and once it reached 28% on their scale, they intended to return to Ummo before it might be too late. However, they contacted the Spanish ufologist Rafael Fierros and explained that they had constructed 3 hideouts, one in France, one in Spain, and one in Yugoslavia, in case they were suddenly caught in a nuclear war. Each refuge would apparently accommodate 100 people, both Umites and their contacts, for 2 years, at which time they hoped they could emerge to safety. To ensure that they reached these hideouts before being engulfed in a nuclear fireball, the Umites claimed that they had placed agents on both American and Russian missile sites, who would contact a third agent in Bilbao, Spain, if they suspected their side was about to press the button. The code phrase was, "Aunt Margaret is very ill." The man in Bilbao would notify the Umites and their contacts, each of whom would have already been given a code, enabling them to decipher a message describing where he could find a hidden box. Inside the box there would be a sonar device that would guide each person safely to the secret refuge by means of a high-pitched signal. As soon as Fierros heard about this scheme, he got in touch with his fellow ufologist Antonio Ribera, Spain's best-known UFO researcher, who quickly realized just how absurd the whole story was. It was certainly ingenious, but it was also riddled with illogicalities. For one thing, it would be virtually impossible for an Ummo agent inside an American or Russian missile base to have time or even be allowed to telephone someone in Bilbao about his aunt's health. In any case, the plan excluded the possibility that a nuclear war might be started by a country other than America or Russia. Ribera was also skeptical about the sonar device, for even if it could guide people through diversions and traffic jams, the whole journey could still take so long that those looking for their hideouts might be caught in a nuclear explosion. As far as many are concerned, the most unconvincing aspect of the case concerns the photographs taken of the UFOs at Luce in San Jose. The Spanish ufologist Oscar del Barrer challenged the authenticity of the pictures of the UFO above San Jose, pointing out a number of inconsistencies. He noted, for example, that all the reports of the sighting referred to a number of witnesses in the grounds of a nearby country house. Why then did not they appear in the photograph? The American UFO Research Group, Ground Saucer Watch, analyzed the photographs with a computer and came to a conclusion very similar to that of the French ufologist Claude Poer. He argued that San Jose photographs were fakes and that they could well have been made using a plastic plate with lettering in ink, probably suspended from a fishing line. GSW, that's Ground Saucer Watch, determined that the object was extremely close to the camera and was probably an article such as paper plate, less than 8 inches in diameter. Most of all, edge enhancement suggested that the saucer or plate was suspended by a very thin piece of thread. They concluded, as Poer had done, that the photographs showed a paper or plastic plate with the Ummo markings applied with ink, suspended from a transparent thread at a short distance from the camera, positioned close to the ground. The photographs had been taken at the site of the alleged UFO sightings and in similar weather conditions to those on June 1st, 1967, at San Jose. Presumably, however, they had been taken before that date so that journalists in Antonio could collect them from a photographic laboratory in the belief that they had been taken the previous evening. However, Ribera and Fierros thought the photographs were genuine. This could have been because so many witnesses said that they had seen a UFO, yet many of the eyewitness accounts appear to be anonymous, and it seems that the only person to have carried out any research into this aspect of the case was Jose Luis Jordan, who was one of the main witnesses of the UFO at Aluche. Could he be the mastermind, or, as some have suggested, behind Ummo? Those who believe that he is argue that their suspicion is supported by the fact that two other Spanish researchers, Zalbidia and Lizar, reported that there had in fact been only one witness to the Aluche sighting who reported seeing any markings, and that person was Jordan, and he already knew about Ummo and the Umite's special mark. An anonymous investigator quoted by Rivera and Ferrios claimed to have met several witnesses to the San Jose sighting, again all anonymous, who saw the UFO, but insist that it was in sight for only about 2.5 minutes instead of the 12 more generally claimed, and that it bore no markings. In other words, there could have been a UFO sighting at Aluche in February 1966 and another in June of 1967, but the markings could have been invented by Jordan or someone else to give credibility to the Ummo story. Rivera and Ferrios, who knew Jordan personally and referred to him as our friend in their book, Un Casa Perfecto, do not seem to have regarded him as the mastermind behind the case. Some suggested that they were being over-credulous. Others that they did not look into the case sufficiently thoroughly. Why, for example, was the matter of the typist and the Danish doctors never pursued? When the typist wrote to all those on the Umite mailing list suggesting a meeting, he must have given his name and address or some other means of making contact. Another obvious step would have been to tape record the telephone conversations with the alleged Umites. Voice analysis would have been revealing, establishing whether the speaker was a native Spaniard. No doubt, many of the recipients of the Ummo scripts, believing firmly in their authenticity, would have been reluctant to cooperate in any such investigation. But the engineer Enrique Villagrasa Novoa, who willingly told Rivera that he had been contacted by the Umites, could surely have helped in the research for the elusive typist. Rivera and Ferrios describe how they attempted to trace the San Jose photographers, but without success. Yet it is known that the first set of photographs was left at a photographic laboratory for San Antonio to collect. Why did not anyone approach the laboratory to find out who had left the pictures there? Whether the laboratory had printed the photographs, and, if so, on what date? Any scrap of information might have been crucial. In short, the investigation into this so-called perfect case was less thorough than might have been expected. Indeed, some cynics suggest that this is proof of a cover-up. If the Ummo affair was a hoax, then it presumably involved a lot of organization. It is claimed that the Umites wrote approximately 6,700 letters. Some people think that the scale of this operation must have been beyond the scope of a private individual, and that a government department must have been involved. However, there is not a scrap of evidence to support this idea, and others find the whole business so amateurish that they think only a group of university students could be responsible. But the skeptics still have one point to answer. Who could have known that a UFO would appear on June 1st, 1967 at 8:20 p.m. above Aluche, as predicted in the Spanish newspaper Informaciones? So there you go. There's the Aliens of Ummo. What do you think? Fact or fiction? Either way, it's a fun little story. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Thanks as always, Jimmy Haunted. We'll see you again right here next week. God bless.